What is the humble horror movie without its fair share of death? Death, after all, is a blanket term for many different end-of-life situations, and some are considerably more unfavourable than others. Would you rather be quietly killed in your sleep or tied up in a sack and set on fire? Does getting diced and put on ice equal a pain-free end? Depends whether Ghostface is your butcher. And is it better to die by swallowing your tongue or a tin of blue paint? It's time to find out. I'm Jem from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 horror movie deaths that get worse the more you think about it. Number 10. What's in the Box? Buried 2010. Buried has never really received the attention it deserves, being written off by some as phone booth underground and generally not finding traction on the big or small screens, despite its star drawing Ryan Reynolds. Reynolds plays Paul Conroy, a truck driver working in Iraq who falls prey to a gang of terrorists who kidnap him, nail him in a coffin and bury him alive. With time and air supply running out, Paul has to use the limited resources available to him, namely a BlackBerry, a Zippo and a pen to direct the FBI to his burial site. It should go without saying that things don't go as planned, and Paul signs off with sand up to his neck, no rescue team in sight. Far from a quick death, this one plays on a whole plethora of our greatest fears. There's the claustrophobia of being trapped in a restrictive box, becoming all the more restricted as sand flows in, there's the slow suffocation as air runs out, and there's the pain of swallowing and breathing in the sand that takes its place. But more than all of this, Paul dies with a full and certain knowledge that nobody is coming to save him, going to his doom feeling, well, doomed. Truly, the stuff of nightmares. Number 9. Fridge full of fun. Scream 6, 2023. Although the cast are now jumping from the franchise like rats fleeing a sinking ship, 2022's Scream and its sequel brought back the iconic 90s horror series with gusto, offering up contemporary motives for the same old Ghostface. The original trio return from the beyond to shepherd us into a new era 25 years after the original Woodsboro murders, where we focus on a new group of youngsters. At the core of this group are Tara and Sam Carpenter, played by Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera, estranged sisters with a deep link to the Woodsboro killers. Far from being a superficial change, the sisters give fans something we've never seen before by leading Ghostface into the city for Scream 6. And once the film gets going, it doesn't stop, with the first of a series of horrific visuals coming in the form of Greg, a Ghostface imitator who is found by flatmate Jason in pieces in the fridge. We've seen enough bodies on ice to be unfazed by this, but let's consider the implications. Given Ghostface's weapon of choice is a knife, this kill would have been slow and ugly. Also, given how little time Ghostface had to set up his trap for Jason, Greg would have to have been hastily butchered alive and screaming. Number 8. Beau is Afraid, A Quiet Place 2018. One minute you're there enjoying the ever-loving heck out of your new battery-powered space rocket, the next minute you're monster meat. No, this isn't the story of Buzz Lightyear, but of Beau Abbott, the first victim of John Krasinski's A Quiet Place. Besieged by blind aliens with super-sensitive oral systems, the Earth has become a place of terror for the surviving human beings. Amongst them are the Abbott family, who have managed to get by on a strict policy of silence and vigilance. Unfortunately, youngest son Beau did not get the memo. After his toy rocket attracts the monsters and leads to his death in the first act, we are stuck with the perspective of a quietly grieving family and the loss of their youngest son and sibling. But what about the other side of it? Death from a child's perspective is harrowing enough, but to be suddenly taken by a feral, panel-headed hell beast from space is something else entirely. Somehow he had no idea it was coming. So there's the extreme fear factor to consider, but let's be honest, the sheer violence of the death itself will have been harrowing, a level of suffering usually only ascribed to innocence in bleak realist dramas. Number 7. Going to Pieces on the Table, Thanksgiving 2023. Praise be to the producer who decided to greenlight Eli Roth's Thanksgiving, allowing the director to return to form with a slasher that feels both familiar and fresh. Adapted from Roth's fake trailer contribution to Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino's Grindhouse double feature, Thanksgiving sees a John Carver masked maniac terrorize the not-so-good folks of Plymouth on the anniversary of a fatal Black Friday disaster. Gunning for the group of teens who got into the town's megastore early on Black Friday and caused a stampede, Carver stalks their homes, school and places of work, inviting them to his Thanksgiving dinner, dead or alive. Among the unfortunate victims is Yulia, played by Jenna Warren, who is hunted through her mid-renovation home and stabbed in the eardrums. But that's only where the misery begins. Carver catches her and, when her friends arrive to try and stop him, throws Yulia on a table-mounted buzzsaw which takes her fingers, slices open her hand, her shoulder, her chest, her stomach, you name it. Mercifully, we only see it from a couple of angles, but the damage is extensive and, as if we need to say it, fatal. Even though she died quickly, she died brutally, and worst of all, her friends who witnessed every moment are left with a lifetime of trauma. Number 6, I'll Have the Tongue, The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. The second adaptation of Thomas Harris's horror book series after the failed Brian Cox starring Manhunter, The Silence of the Lambs puts its best foot forward with the now definitive Hannibal Lecter, Anthony Hopkins. Junior FBI agent Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, interviews Lecter, an imprisoned intellectual, cannibal and psychopath, in the hopes of uncovering insights into the new case she's working on. But everyone involved gets more than they bargained for, as Lecter proves to be not only charismatic and charming, but slippery, disastrously clever, and capable of engineering his own escape from long-term incarceration. While Lecter is the undeniable star of the movie, his presence looming large over every act, he doesn't get to do an awful lot. But what he lacks in quantity, he makes up for in quality. Lecter's first kill of the film is fellow prisoner Miggs, who he influences into committing suicide by swallowing his own tongue. The precise cause of death is never revealed, but we have to assume he suffocated or choked on his oral organ, and spent a significant amount of time in fear and anguish. What is worse still, however, is trying to fathom what Lecter might have said to him. How could a conversation make him do something so severe? What psychological horrors did Lecter inflict with words alone? Thankfully, we will never know. Number 5. Burn Baby, Burn, Mandy 2018. This movie is largely responsible for Nicolas Cage's resurgence as a serious acting talent in recent years, helping drag him out of a glut of mindless straight-to-video action flicks and back onto the big screen with surreal retro horror, Mandy. Cage stars as Red, a forester who lives a quiet life out in the sticks with his quirky petrol station cashier-cum-artist girlfriend Mandy, played by Andrea Riseborough. Their relative bliss is brutally shattered by a hippie cult who come a-travelling by and happen to take an interest in Mandy. Unable to make her sleep with him, or even take him seriously, cult leader Jeremiah Sand has Mandy strung up in a sack and burned alive in front of Red. Again, this is a death we largely experience through the lens of another, Red's grief, leaving little space to consider the visceral experience had by Mandy herself. Messed up on terrifying hallucinogenic drugs that the cult forcefully injected her with, it is difficult to say just how horrific Mandy's subjective experience would be. But add to this the horror and pain of burning alive while trapped in a sack, suffocating and unable to escape, plus hearing the anguished cries of your partner. It's all a bit too much. Number 4, Suicide by Paint, Beau is Afraid, 2023. Given the unhinged, freewheeling nature of director Ari Aster's latest, Odyssey and Beau is Afraid, it is hard to keep track of all the injuries, mayhem and death going on, but this one in particular is a death most of us forgot even happened. Well, buckle in because here comes the Bad Memory Express. Protagonist Beau, played by Joaquin Phoenix, has a hard life, living in downtown hell, suffering abuse on the street, loud neighbours and all the other supercharged city miseries. Whether he likes it or not, he winds up taking a break from it all in the suburbs, hosted by a woman who runs him down in her ambulance, whose psychotic teenage daughter Tony is determined to rebel against anything, including life itself. Downing the better part of a tin of blue paint, Tony is gone before we know it, and Beau, the wrongly accused perpetrator, is chased out of town. But let's have a think about the logistics. Given how quickly the paint kills Tony, it must have toxic pigments. While we don't see it on screen, the paint would have damaged her airways, intestinal tract and other internal organs, tearing the teenager apart from the inside. Granted, we could instead assume she simply suffocated, but breathing in half a tin of paint doesn't sound a whole lot better. Number 3, Face Melting Solo, Death Proof, 2007. Death Proof is widely considered to be Quentin Tarantino's worst film. A neo-grindhouse offering modelled after the exploitation flicks the director grew up with, the film was always gonna attract a niche crowd. Whether the audience is warm to it or not, Death Proof undeniably packs a punch, making the most of Kurt Russell as sinister stuntman Mike, who uses his souped-up Death Proof Chevrolet Nova as a deadly weapon, with the intention of murdering young women, and murder young women he does. The mid-film car crash shows just what stuntman Mike's capable of, driving head-on into the car of 4 young women we took to be the film's protagonist, ending their screen time for good. Although the visuals are pretty gory, we think of the car crash as being one event, and a straightforward if grisly death for everyone involved, except Mike. And yet, Arlene, who is in the back seat wearing a seatbelt, doesn't die on impact. She in fact has her face gouged off by the Chevy's rear wheel, but this is not where the suffering ends. Out on a back road at night with barely any traffic, it would be a long time before anyone found them, and even longer before the ambulance got there. Meanwhile, she is left to die in agony, stuck in the wreck and bleeding out from whatever's left of her face. Let us know your thoughts on this list in the comments down below, and while you're there, drop us a like, share and subscribe too. Number 2. Insides Out. Inside 2007. Inside centers on expectant mother Sarah, survivor of a recent car crash that took her husband's life, who is home alone on Christmas Eve when a stranger calls. That stranger is none other than the delightfully controversial Beatrice Dull, referred to in the credits as La Femme, who turns out to have been the other party in that fateful car crash. Well, La Mère might be a more apt title, because while she lost her own unborn baby in the crash, she has never stopped seeing herself as a mother and has come to claim Sarah's child. Subjecting the young mother-to-be to a night of terror and torture, La Femme crowns the evening's events by performing a drug-free cesarean section. Of course, Sarah dies in the process, with her intestines all down her, guts having been pushed aside to allow her attacker / midwife to deliver the baby. But what about the baby? Sarah dies in the agony of the cesarean and all the other injuries she sustained throughout the night, but also in the knowledge that her newborn, who may or may not have been damaged from the repeated beatings Sarah's taken, is now in the hands of a vicious madwoman. And number 1, thumped, dunked and destroyed, The Cell 2000. The Cell follows psychologist Catherine Dean, played by Jennifer Lopez, on her journey into serial killer Carl Starger's mind. Here she experiences the many manifestations of his desires, ego, passions, and of course, liking of torture and death. The film comes to a head when Catherine takes Starger's consciousness into her own mind. Don't ask how, just go with it. Where she slays not just one, but all 3 manifestations of himself: child, played by Jake Thomas, adult, and monstrous shape-shifting king. The thing is, all manifestations suffer as one, meaning that when Catherine savagely beats and impales King Starger, the child version experiences it too. But while this kills the king, it doesn't kill the child, and she has to drown him in a pool in order to complete the process in real life. While it's all good and well talking about this as an airy-fairy, non-material plane, the fact of the matter is, Starger has to die in 3 different ways: king, child, and physical body, and the experience of dying again and again can't be the best.